I'm back with Nick Noorani. He's the author of Arrival Survival Canada and is the publisher of the Canadian Immigrant magazine. Nick, we were talking about this. How do we discriminate who gets in? But I know that word's a bit of a reactionary word. Let's talk about the word choose. Obviously, we wouldn't want a terrorist in the country. We wouldn't want someone who's maybe poses a risk in Canada.
Right.
What about someone who has a disease? What about someone who has AIDS?
Well, let's talk about how do we choose. There is a system in place, and the system is called a point system. So it's based on your education, it's based on your work experience, and your adaptability into the country. So when we use the word adaptability, what do we mean exactly? We mean familiarity with the language. If you don't speak English, you can't come into the country. English or French, you can't come into the country. Period.
At all?
You know, you can't.
But how come I meet people that can't speak any English?
Good question. They're probably from the other categories, which is the family reunification. They're probably someone's husband, wife, or brother, or whatever, or they're refugees. They don't necessarily have to fall into that category. But the bulk of immigrants who come in, 55% of immigrants who come in out of the 250,000 are English or French speaking. So that's, we already choose from that basis.
But you have this point system, and it sounds like to me that they're saying, yes, we have the point system, but the people that may even have a higher point status, maybe number 500,000 in the line, they're just saying, if you have a higher point, let's get you to the front and get you processed quicker.
Which is why I agree. We do need to have a parallel system where if we want someone to pick berries, he should not have to be a PhD. I agree. But let's open up a separate category. Let's not bring them in as temporary labor. As you rightly said, you know, temporary labor, when they come in, they don't go through the checks and balances that I, as an immigrant, went through to ensure that I don't have communicable diseases. They're brought in 30 days, whereas it takes 5 years for an immigrant to come in. So the question is, these temporary workers, what are the checks and balances that are being cut off in order to bring them in 30 days? Let's talk about what's good for Canada.
And you're saying that's not a good idea, but yet we need these. There's jobs, there's oil field jobs, there's farm jobs that need to be met, and there's no one to meet the need.
And there are immigrants. Every year there are 250,000 immigrants coming in. They are there to do the jobs.
What if they don't want to do the jobs?
Well, the problem is that they can be, these temporary laborers whom companies are bringing, corporations are bringing, they're coming in at a lower wage rate.
Right.
Number one. Number two, Randall, when a temporary worker comes into the country, he sends his money out of the country.
Right.
All that he earns. How does that help our economy? Number two.
Yet the work is getting done. That's what the employers would say.
That's all. Right. Why don't we create a parallel point system for laborers? I have nothing
labor
against
immigrants.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have nothing against bringing in labor, but bring them in as immigrants so they have an attachment to the country. A temporary worker has no attachment.
Should we discriminate or choose based upon maybe a kind of a decency test of, let's say you come from a country where women aren't treated as equal, where you are allowed to use violence toward your wife or something like that. Should we say, no, we're not going to allow that kind of, because we see that the spousal rates are higher in this community? Is that a good idea?
It's so subjective. It's like asking someone, have you stopped beating your wife today?
Yeah, right. As soon as you start to answer, you're like, no, yes, what do I do?
Right. So it's very subjective. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see the government spend more money in preparing immigrants from before they come into the country. You know, there are countries, Denmark does a great job of this. They spend money on preparing the immigrants to come in, so that when they come in, they're not shocked by the liberal environment that they come into.
And would that translate then into religious communities? Obviously, in a multi-ethnic society, there's different religious views that are being vented.
And we, as our charter provides us the ability to choose whatever religion we practice.
And yet that religion can't go against the charter. There's some limitations on the freedom of religion.
Absolutely. So I can't turn around and say, well, I'm Muslim, I want to have 4 wives.
Right.
But, you know,
unless you're living bountiful and right. But there seems to be a sense that I have an entitlement. Do you ever come across that with some of the immigrants? No. I'm in Canada, I'm entitled to something.
You know, I'll tell you, I've been working with immigrants right now for 10 years. I picked them up from the airport, unknown strangers from the airport who reach out to me and say, Nick.
You just stand at the airport and say, you don't know anyone, I'll be your friend. Yeah,
well, I can understand. I've walked in their shoes.
Wow. Right.
I've been an immigrant, and I'll always wear that on my sleeve. I'm an immigrant, and I'll die one. I'm a very proud Canadian immigrant, I must say. And last year, I became a citizen after 9 years. And so I was asked on a radio show, why did you wait 9 years? And I said, I didn't want to take it as an entitlement. I wanted to have earned it. I wanted to have given back to the country I've adopted. And I believe I have.
And would you say that most immigrants that you come across have a shared idea of what it means to be Canadian?
There's actually a research survey which was conducted. It was called the Longitudinal Survey. And a large majority of immigrants love Canada for what it is. 87%, Randall, of immigrants who come to Canada become citizens. We have the highest rate. We as a nation, we select our future citizens. We're not selecting immigrants. We're selecting future citizens. So we put a lot of importance into that. Let's continue that.
Thanks so much for coming on our show tonight. It was a really fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
You can read the Canadian Immigrant magazine online at thecanadianimmigrant.com.